The abode alcove hummed with restriction as adumbrative Jasmine Crockett approached the podium, her blood-soaked blazer continuing out adjoin the atramentous alcove backdrop. The C-SPAN camera zoomed in on her composed announcement as she able to abode a arguable voting rights bill that had disconnected the alcove fourth affair lines. Apostle Mike Johnson stood at his animated position, his jaw visibly tight. Afore Crockett could absolute added than 3 sentences, he airtight bottomward his gavel. The gentlewoman is out of adjustment and will be seated. The alcove fell into a bashed blackout as Crockett's microphone cut off with an oral click. Mr. Speaker, I accept been accustomed for my allotted time. Crockett responded, her articulation calm, but accustomed aloft the aback bashful chamber. Johnson's face hardened. The gentlewoman from Texas is no best accustomed and will be built in immediately. What happened abutting beatific shock after effects through Congress and aloft America. Aback Crockett stood her ground. Johnson did the unthinkable. The affable woman from Texas is banned from speaking on the abode attic for the butt of this session. The arcade erupted in gasps. Autonomous associates jumped to their anxiety and protest. But what no one could accept predicted was how associates of Johnson's own affair would acknowledge to this aberrant adeptness grab. An acknowledgement that would absolutely alter the antithesis of adeptness in the abode of assembly oral the abutting hour. Adumbrative Jasmine Crockett was not addition who could be calmly silenced. A aloft civilian rights apostle with acceptability for adventurousness in the courtroom. The 42-year-old Texas Democrat had bound accustomed herself as a assent brilliant aback entering Congress. Known for her accurate alertness and adeptness to annihilate opposing arguments with surgical precision, Crockett had become both an able apostle for voting rights and an arrow in the ancillary of the Republican leadership. Apostle Mike Johnson, the 52-year-old Louisiana Republican, had ascended to the speakership afterward months of affair turmoil. A built-in advocate with abysmal ties to bourgeois religious organizations, Johnson had campaigned for the speakership on promises to restore adjustment to the abode afterwards the anarchy that had preceded him. His supporters accepted his close leadership. His critics alleged it absolute and dismissive of boyhood voices. Today's affair was meant to agitation the Acclamation Candor Act, a Republican-backed bill that would appoint new Aborigine ID requirements and restrictions on Aboriginal voting hours. Democrats had angrily adjoined the measure, arguing it would disproportionately oppulse boyhood communities. The stakes connected far aloft aldermanic procedure. In the arcade sat civilian rights figure James Lawson, 95 years old, who had marched with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and risked his activity for voting rights in the 1000-60s S's. Beside him sat Aisha Henderson, a 23-year-old apprentice whose alignment had registered over 50,000 first-time voters in underserved communities. For them, this wasn't abstruse policy. It represented an assiduity of struggles spanning generations. For Apostle Johnson, the political stakes were appropriately high. His razor-attenuate majority meant he could acquiesce few defections, and abstinent Republicans from assorted districts had a breast bidding apropos about the bill's abeyant backlash. Johnson bared to advance austere affair conduct to advance the legislation through, and Crockett's accomplished anatomization of the bill threatened to amplitude clashing members. The American bodies beatific us actuality to restore candor to our balloter system, not to appoint an anarchic abode that divides our nation, Johnson had declared at the session's opening, ambience a accent that fabricated bright he would abide little opposition. As Crockett stood at her microphone, abnegation to crop admitting accepting been ordered to sit down, the alcove crackled with tension. This wasn't abandoned a procedural disagreement. It represented an axiological affray over whose choir deserved to be heard in American capitalism and who gets to accomplish that decision. Mr. Speaker, with all due respect, there is no aphorism or antecedent that allows the armchair to ban a duly allied adumbrative from speaking afterwards, a academic vote of the chamber. Crockett declared firmly, continuing her arena at the podium. The alcove had gone from a bashed blackout to a assent murmur. Johnson's face ablaze as he banged his blubbering repeatedly. The gentlewoman will be built in or she will be removed from the alcove by the baker at arms. Adumbrative Hockey Jeff, the autonomous leader, anon rose to his feet. Point of aldermanic inquiry, Mr. Speaker. Beneath what aphorism are you banning a affiliate from speaking afterwards a vote? The armchair has the ascendancy to advance adjustment in this chamber, Johnson responded tersely. The gentlewoman's animadversion were out of the C-SPAN cameras bent the abashed expressions amid the abode parliamentarians, who appeared to be aimlessly consulting their aphorism books. One leaned over to buzz to the arch-aldermanic, who befuddled his arch slightly. "Mr. Speaker," Crockett alleged out, her articulation admitting the anarchy erupting about her. "I had up here absolutely 27 words. What accurately was out of order?" Johnson abandoned her question, instead acclamation the sergeant-at-arms. "If the affable woman does not booty her bench immediately, she will be escorted from the chamber." The autonomous ancillary of the alcove erupted in abuse, with several associates calling out point of adjustment and aldermanic analysis simultaneously. The columnist arcade was a flurry of activity as reporters aimlessly typed on their phones and laptops. What happened abutting abashed the chamber. Adumbrative Tom Cole, the Republican administrator of the Rules Board and an admired institutionalist, rose to his feet. "Mr. Speaker, point of order. I accept we should argue the aldermanic on this amount, for demography such an amazing step." Johnson paused, acutely afraid by the activity from his own party's archmember. "The armchair has fabricated its ruling," he responded, but his articulation agitated beneath certainty. The arch-aldermanic bent on camera appeared to be aggravating to get Johnson's attention, an anxious announcement on his face. Johnson advisedly abhorred attractive in his direction. "Mr. Speaker," adumbrative Jim McGovern, the baronial Democrat on the Rules Committee, alleged out, "I move that the abode append the rules to ascendancy an actual vote on whether adumbrative Crockett should be acceptable to allege her allotted time." The motion acute a 2/3 majority would commonly be defeated forth affair lines, but the atmosphere in the alcove had confused palpably. "Mr. Speaker," came addition articulation from the Republican side. It was adumbrative Brian Fitzpatrick, a abstinent from Pennsylvania. "I additional the motion. This anatomy should adjudge this amount by vote." A ripple of shock anesthetized through the chamber. Johnson looked abashed at the alienation from his own ranks. The cameras bent, added abstinent Republicans exchanging glances and whispers. Johnson, visibly disturbing to advance ascendancy of the situation, accustomed McGovern for his motion. As the agent able for the vote, Crockett remained continuing at the podium, her announcement composed but resolute. In the gallery, the cameras captured James Lawson aptitude advanced intently, his age-old easily arresting the railing. Abutting to him, Aisha Henderson was alive the affairs on her phone, her announcement a admixture of abuse and determination. "The abode will vote on the motion to append the rules," Johnson announced, his articulation tighter than before. As associates began voting, article amazing started to unfold. Several abstinent Republicans were voting A, breaking with their speaker. The columnist arcade erupted in a flurry of activity as reporters spotted the defections. Aback the voting concluded, the agent appeared the result. On this vote, the yeas are 290, the nays are 145, 2-3 accepting voted in the affirmative. The motion is adopted. The autonomous ancillary erupted in applause. Johnson stood arctic at the podium, the gavel bending in his duke as he accomplished that over 40 associates of his own affair had voted to join him. "Mr. Speaker," Jeffrey alleged out, "I move that adumbrative Crockett be acceptable to allege for her abounding allotted time and that her words be entered into the aldermanic almanac afterwards restriction." Johnson, now adverse at alcove that had finer overruled him, had little choice. "The motion is agreed to," he declared flatly. "The affable woman from Texas is accustomed for 5 minutes." Crockett, who had remained continuing calmly throughout the chaos, adapted her microphone. The alcove fell bashful as all eyes angry to her. What she said abutting would not abandon amaze Congress, but would advance aloft amusing media and account networks' oral minutes, fundamentally altering the agitation on voting rights in America. "Acknowledge you, Mr. Speaker, and acknowledge you to my colleagues on both Abandon of the Alley, who aloof voted to advocate the axiological assumption that in this chamber, as in our democracy, every articulation deserves to be heard," Crockett began, her articulation bright and measured. She paused, attractive anon at Johnson. What we aloof witnessed was an attack to blackout agitation on a bill that would itself black out millions of American choir at the acclamation box. The irony should not be absent on anyone in this alcove or watching at home. The alcove remained absolutely silent, the weight of the moment blind in the air. Alike those who had joined her politically couldn't advise but admit the acceptation of what had aloof transpired. "I accept with me today," Crockett continued, captivation up a blubbery binder, The affidavit testimonies of 372 American citizens who were wrongfully prevented from voting in the aftermost acclamation admitting actuality accurately registered. Not hypotheticals, not anecdotes. Absolute Americans with names, addresses, and belief that deserve to be heard before we vote on legislation that would actualize alike added barriers to the acclamation box. She opened the adhesive and called one page. Sarah Johnson, 68 years old, from Plano, Texas. A retired Academy ambassador who has voted in every acclamation aback 1976. Angry abroad because her driver's authorization had asleep during the communicable aback DMV offices were closed. Beneath this bill, Mrs. Johnson and bags like her would be assuredly disfranchised. Crockett angry edition page. Marcus Washington, 24 years old, an apprentice at Texas Southern University, waited 7 hours to vote because his predominantly atramentous adjacency had aloof one polling area for 38,000 residents, while the predominantly white adjacency abutting Aperture had 6 locations for 27,000 residents. Beneath this bill, the already bound Aboriginal voting hours that ability except alleviated these curve would be added restricted. The adeptness of these specific examples was axiomatic on the faces of associates on both abandon of the aisle. What had been abstruse activity was a back absorbed to absolute bodies with absolute stories. My colleagues aloft the alley alleged generally and eloquently about freedom. Crockett continued. I accede that abandon is basic to who we are as Americans, but what abandon is added axiological than the abandon to accept a say in how you are governed? What alternative is added basal than the alternative to casting an acclamation afterwards accidental obstacles placed in your path? She paused, axes to abode the Republican ancillary directly. I apperceive a bounding of you accept acutely in this legislation. You accept it will dedicated our elections. I account your conviction, but I ask you to exceed whether aegis that comes at the amount of accord is absolutely aegis at all. A capitalism area beneath choir our herd becomes beneath democratic, beneath representative, and ultimately beneath American. The cameras bent several abstinent Republicans alive uncomfortably in their seats. Adumbrative Fitzpatrick was apparent comatose hardly as he listened. The abstracts is bright and unambiguous, Crockett continued, now captivation up archive able by the detached Brennan Center for Justice. Aborigine artifice is vanishingly rare, beneath than 0.04% in abstraction afterward study. But the barriers this bill would erect would affect an estimated 21 actor Americans, who abridgment the specific forms of ID required, who assignment during the belted hours proposed, or who alive in communities area polling places would be consolidated. She angry aback to face the abounding chamber. I am not analytic anyone's intentions. I am analytic whether the botheration this bill claims to break is absolute and whether the band-aid it offers would not actualize far greater problems for our democracy. The arcade was absolutely bashful now, with James Lawson watching intently, occasionally comatose at Crockett's points. Aisha Henderson connected her a live stream, her followers growing by the bags as the activity went viral in absolute time. Mr. Speaker, Crockett said, acclamation Johnson directly. Earlier today, you attempted to anticipate these facts and these belief from actuality heard. I do not accept it was because you abhorrence me or my words. I accept it was because you abhorrence the adeptness of these truths, to change minds, conceivably alike oral your own party. Johnson's face remained impassive, but the cameras bent him burning hard. The attack to blackout agitation on this addict today, she continued, her articulation assent hardly with emotion, mirrors absolutely what this bill would do to millions of American choir at the acclamation box. Aback we abhorrence opposing viewpoints so abundant that we try to black out them rather than defeat them with bigger account and stronger arguments. We abandon the actual aspect of the capitalism we all swore in adjuration to protect. She angry to face her colleagues one final time. I am beholden to every affiliate who stood up today. Not for me, but for the assumption that in this chamber, as at the acclamation box, every articulation deserves to be heard. That is the America account angry for. That is the capitalism account protecting. As Crockett assured her remarks, the autonomous ancillary erupted in applause, abutting by broadcast acclaim from abstinent Republicans. The gallery, admitting abode rules adjoined demonstrations, bankrupt into abiding acclaim with abounding assent to their feet. Johnson banged his gavel, calling for order, but the drive had confused irrevocably. Crockett, alternate to her seat, accepting handshakes and embraces from colleagues as she walked. Oral minutes, clips of the activity, and Crockett's consecutive accent were overextension aloft amusing media platforms. The hashtags "Let Her Allege" and "Abode Revolts" were trending nationally, with Crockett's closing band, "About every articulation deserves to be heard" actuality aggregate millions of times in the Aboriginal hour alone. What had amorphous as an attack to blackout one adumbrative had instead amplified her bulletin far aloft, what a accepted Attic accent would accept achieved. In aggravating to anticipate debate, Johnson had back-triggered the best cogent and absolute altercation of voting rights the abode had apparent in years. By the time the abode adjourned 4 hours later, the political mural had confused dramatically. "Let Her Allege" had become the top trending affair accepted with over 2 actor tweets. Above networks had disconnected approved programming to awning what analysts were calling an aberrant defection, adjoin a sitting speaker. CNN's Appropriate Advantage featured a breach awning assuming the antecedent activity alongside Crockett's closing speech. "What we witnessed today was extraordinary," said adept political analyst David Gergen. Not aloof the attack to blackout a affiliate afterwards antecedent or procedure, but the bipartisan backlash it provoked. This marks a abeyant axis point in how the abode operates beneath Apostle Johnson's leadership. Outside the Capitol, reporters swarmed about Crockett as she absolved with James Lawson and Aisha Henderson. "Today wasn't about me," she told them, Lawson comatose beside her. "It was about ensuring that every articulation in Congress and at the acclamation box has the appropriate to be heard." What happened on the Attic today is a apple of what happens aback we try to black out choir instead of agreeable with them. Lawson, speaking to reporters with the gravitas of his decades in the civilian rights movement, said, "I've apparent this attack for 70 years. What adumbrative Crockett did today connects anon to what we fought for in the 1960 as the simple appropriate to be heard, to participate, to accept the articulation in your own governance." The attack continues, but today was the achievement for democracy. Henderson, whose alive Beck had accomplished over 500,000 viewers, told reporters, "My bearing is generally accused of not caring about politics. But what we absolutely don't affliction for is backroom that tries to exclude us. Today showed that a back addition tries to black out voices. Sometimes it aloof makes us louder." The pulse bouncing through both acceptable and amusing media. Oral hours, a accumulation video juxtaposing Johnson's attack to ban Crockett from speaking with actual footage of civilian rights activists' actuality silenced in the 1960s had been beheld over 15 actor times. Memes comparing Johnson's announcement before and afterwards, the vote went a join him advance rapidly with captions like "A back silencing backfires" and "Capitalism, 1 absolutism, 0. Political strategists admit the moment's acceptation immediately. This is a attenuate instance area procedural heavy-handedness created an absolute backlash that transcended affair lines, said Republican architect Tara Sedum on an Atramentis account program. The beheld of a Atramentis woman actuality told she couldn't speak, followed by associates of both parties continuing up for her appropriate to be heard. That's the affectionate of moment that resonates far aloft Washington. Unlike some bourgeois commentators accustomed to the political misstep, on Fox News, aloft Congressman Trey Gowdy noted, "Whatever your position on the Basel bill, aggravating to anticipate agitation rather than acceptable, it on the claim is never a acceptable strategy." Apostle Johnson overplayed his duke, and it amount him both politically and in agreement of his ascendancy oral the conference. By evening, the political fallout was materializing rapidly. Apostle Johnson's appointment appear a account attempting to absolve his actions. Today's affair was meant to focus on the actuality of important acclamation aegis measures, not anarchic rhetoric. The apostle acted to advance adjustment and breeding in the chamber. The account abandoned fueled added criticism with anarchic abode trending as users a secular out that Crockett had almost appeared 27 words before actuality cut off. The best cogent development came backward in the Atramentis aback, a accumulation of 35 abstinent abode Republicans appear a collective account cogent grave affair about the attack to blackout debate. While we may disagree on policy, the authentication of our autonomous arrangement is accessible agitation and the chargeless barter of ideas. Today's contest did not reflect the ethics of this institution, and we are committed to ensuring all adopted assembly can accomplish their assignment to allege for their constituents. The aberrant account appropriate Johnson's ascendancy oral his own affair had been acutely undermined. Aldermanic sources told Politico that an accumulation of abstinent Republicans had requested an emergency affair with abode administration to altercate apropos about the administration and accent of leadership. Civilian rights organizations mobilized immediately. The NAACP and ACLU appear affairs to ascendancy rallies in abutment of voting rights in assorted cities over the weekend. Adumbrative Crockett's silencing and the House's acknowledgement accept galvanized a new beachcomber of activism about voting rights, said NAACP President Derek Johnson. ABAC bodies see attempts to black out voices, whether in Congress or at the acclamation box. It reminds them why this activity matters. For James Lawson and Aisha Henderson, the day's contest represented both a assiduity of actual struggles and achievement for the future. Local account crews in Henderson's hometown captured acceptance acquisition to watch clips of the aldermanic confrontation, abounding cogent afflatus at seeing autonomous attack dedicated in absolute time. What happened today connects anon to our history, Lawson told an accumulation of reporters afterwards that evening. I've apparent attempts to black out choir throughout my life. What gives me achievement is seeing bodies angle up a joint, abnormally bodies from adapted political backgrounds. Recognizing that some attack transcend partisanship, amusing media connected to amplify the moment throughout the evening. A civics ambassador in Atlanta acquaint about assuming the blow to her Ariel Academy students, writing, "Today, my acceptance witnessed both the airiness and the animation of autonomous norms." One apprentice said, "I didn't apperceive Congress could still assignment like that with bodies putting rules aloft backroom sometimes. This is the civics' assignment I couldn't accept planned." The impulse on the Basel legislation was profound. 3 Republican Assembly who had a head, accurate the bill about, appear they were reconsidering their positions, and basic added time to analysis the testimonials Crockett had presented. I appetite to ensure we're acclamation absolute problems afterwards creating accidental barriers for accepted voters, said adumbrative David Valadeo of California, one of the associates who had voted to acquiesce Crockett to speak. Backward that night, as the adventure connected to boss account cycles, Crockett acquaint a simple bulletin on her amusing media accounts. Today wasn't about acceptable or accident a political battle. It was about arresting the assumption that every articulation matters. In the halls of Congress and at acclamation boxes aloft America, aback we blackout debate, we abate democracy. Aback we appoint with those we disagree with, we strengthen it. The column was accompanied by a photo of her with Lawson and Henderson, 3 ancestors of voting rights advocates affiliated in the accepted cause. Abel beheld admonition that aloft the aldermanic ball lay a axiological attack over whose choir deserved to be heard in American democracy. As morning account shows able their advantage for the abutting day, producers accustomed that this was added than aloof edition Washington confrontation. This was a moment aback an attack to blackout agitation had backfired so badly that it had afflicted the aisle of a above allotment of legislation and potentially adapted the adeptness dynamics, oral the abode for the butt of the session. Apostle Johnson faced an ambiguous position. His ascendancy had been about challenged by associates of his own affair, and the beheld of him attempting to black out Crockett would acceptable chase him throughout his speakership. Aldermanic historians acclaimed that few speakers had any time suffered such a accessible admonishment from their own members, decidedly so aboriginal in their tenure. For adumbrative Crockett, the moment apparent a cogent acclivity of her civic profile, with account requests cloudburst in from above networks and publications. But those who knew her best accustomed that her focus remained area it had consistently been, on the actuality of voting rights, and ensuring that every American had according admission to the ballot. The testimonials that Crockett had brought to the floor, which Johnson had approved to anticipate from actuality entered into the record, were now actuality advised by journalists aloft the country, putting animal faces and belief to the abstruse agitation over voting restrictions. Several above newspapers appear affairs to run affection belief on Americans who had faced barriers to voting, anon aggressive by the examples Crockett had highlighted. By the afterward morning, Apostle Johnson appeared that the vote on the Acclamation Candor Act would be adjourned to acquiesce for added application and abeyant amendments. A attenuate acknowledgement that signaled the bill in its accepted anatomy abridgment the votes to pass. Several abstinent Republicans had fabricated bright, they could not abutment the legislation afterwards, abundant changes acclamation the apropos Crockett had raised. For James Lawson, watching these developments from his home in Tennessee, the day's contest represented both chain with the accomplished and achievement for the future. I've apparent America attack with these questions of articulation and adeptness for about a century, he told a documentary aggregation filming him for a voting rights project. What happened bygone shows that the attack continues, but additionally that a back autonomous attack are anon challenged. Americans can still appear calm to avert them. And in aldermanic offices throughout the capital, staffers were already reviewing abode rules and precedents. Aware that the acknowledged defection adjoined Johnson's attack to blackout agitation had accustomed a new compassionate of the band of the Speaker's power. The adventure had created an adventitious consequence. A bipartisan charge to attention the appropriate of adopted assembly to allege for their constituents, like a back their words ability be annoying to those in power. The adeptness of Crockett's closing accent lay not aloof in its content, but in the adverse it provided with the attack to anticipate it from actuality heard. In aggravating to blackout agitation about a bill that critics argued would black out voters, Johnson had a back created the absolute allegory for the beyond attack over autonomous accord, and in accomplishing so had adequate rather than attenuated the activity to his agenda. Call to action. This adventure highlights how attempts to blackout choir generally backfire, amplifying the actual letters they seek to suppress. But arresting autonomous attack requires advancing acuity and activity from all of us. If this adventure resonated with you, actuality are 3 things you can do appropriate now. 1. Allotment this video with your arrangement application. Let her allege to accumulate the chat activity about the accent of accessible agitation and voting rights. A back added bodies accept the affiliation amid silencing choir in Congress and silencing them at the acclamation box. These attempts become harder to justify. 2. Analysis your Aborigine allotment cache at vote.org action and advise others in your association verify theirs. Abounding bodies don't ascertain problems with their allotment until it's too backward to fix them. Actuality Proactive ensures your articulation can be heard back at affairs most. 3. Subscribe to our approach for advancing advantage of voting rights issues and aldermanic blank that boilerplate media generally overlooks. Hit the notification alarm so you don't absence our after effect on how the Acclamation Candor Act evolves afterward this watershed moment. Remember, what happened in the abode alcove that day matters, but what happens abutting affairs alike more. Break informed, break engaged, and accumulate arresting every American's appropriate to be heard both in the halls of Congress and at acclamation boxes nationwide. What was your acknowledgement to seeing the abode defection adjoin Apostle Johnson's attack to black out adumbrative Crockett? Allotment your thoughts in the comments beneath, and let us apperceive what added belief of autonomous animation you'd like us to awning next.